Let me ask you, you've been reading some of your stuff, in fact, a lot of your stuff ahead of our talk this morning, and you've written before that this is with regards to China, but it potentially could apply to the U.S. I don't know. You tell me. That leaders that emerge are leaders that are demanded or needed by the times that they're in. You might be able to apply that to Xi Jinping. I think you suggested that before. Would that also apply to the U.S. and Trump? Would somebody like Trump, who's more authoritarian, be the kind of leader that the times call for during the U.S.?
Yeah, during such times of great conflict, it is normally the case that you have the powerful autocratic leader at a fight, and then you enter into periods of reform. So if we go into China, there's unity when you're fighting the war against Japan, and then there's a civil war, and then there's a winner of the war, and then there's dealing with the opposition of that dynamic. Donald Trump is a manifestation of the condition in the country in terms of that populism.
Okay.
So I think if there was not a Donald Trump, there would be something that's equivalent to that.
Or someone equivalent to that. Interesting. Okay. So, we talk to a lot of people at work, right? And the folks out here, probably the thing they're most interested in or worried about, obviously, November 5th, the outcome of the elections. And if it is Trump, therefore, then tariffs. Everybody seems to be scared of tariffs. What would a Trump presidency, do you think, mean for this part of the world? And we can obviously get to the most important relationship with China as well.
Donald Trump has a classic type of economic policy that we've seen, particularly in the 1930s, such as in Germany, which is a protectionist, nationalist, isolationist policy in which you establish great tariffs. Tariffs are an effective way of raising tax money, by the way. Roughly speaking, if you did his promises, and I did the calculations, if China was increased to 60% and there was a 20% across the board elsewhere tariffs, that would raise about $800 billion a year, which is it's quite a bit of money. And then with that protectionist, then there's the investing in the country and the building up of things in a, that kind of a way. So it would be, you can imagine what it means company by company. If you're in an internal company and you're getting protectionism, you're going to benefit in terms of now all of a sudden you're getting the competition. Of course, it means inefficiency on a global basis, so that it means that the amount of money that's going to, the costliness of goods is going to be a problem. But there's a view that tariff money will also be a form of taxation. Where are you going to get the money to deal with our very big deficit? The deficit situation is a big number. So are you going to get it from taxes? Where are you going to get the money? And that's part of a class warfare thing. So that idea of getting the tax money and get from that source, even though it's inflationary, you could say that taxes is a type of inflation, in a sense, for those who pay it. So there's very much a capitalist, socialist, left-right thing going on. And so, of course, if you're on the other side and you're dependent about exporting to the United States, then that's going to be a problem.
Regardless of who wins, most folks think that the deficit are still not going to get addressed. I'm sure you agree with that, right? When is the shoe going to drop? I'm talking about the U.S. debt and deficit.
I'm sorry? Say that again?
When is the shoe going to drop? Neither candidate seems
this happens.
Either
there's a sequence of how this transpires all the time throughout history. What happens is creation of credit gives buying power. It also creates debt. One man's debts are another man's assets. what do you do when you have too much debt? At the end of the day, when you have too much debt, there's either a default or there's a debt monetization, that the central bank takes money and prints the money and makes it easier to pay back the debt. In all cases through history, including the Great Depression, they print the money, which then has its consequences. It just took longer in the Great Depression. 1929, it took them until 1933. March of 1933, they break the link with gold and they print the money. So that is going to create the dynamic. That means holding bonds, and what is a bond? It is a promise to receive all that money.
It's an IOU, yeah.
And it can produce much more inflation. So that's the dynamic. That's what's going to happen. It'll ultimately be, up to a large extent, monetized. Now, there's a good way of doing that, and there's a bad way of doing that. A good way of doing a deleveraging, in other words, one way or another, you have to bring the debt down relative to the incomes. And there's a good way of doing that and a bad way of doing that. If you're a country in which the debt is mostly denominated in your currency, and mostly the debtors and the creditors are in your country, you can do a beautiful deleveraging. You can manage this a lot better. By the way, that's true for China, and it's true for the United States. And so how do you bring the debt down? First, you have to do a debt restructuring of some form. In other words, there's too much debt, can't pay it all back. Some of it has to be marked down, and it's got to be cleaned off the balance sheets. When you clean it off the balance sheets and you mark it down because one man's debts are another man's assets, that means that somebody's going to get hurt by that process, but it's deflationary, that act in and of itself. But it's necessary to get it off the balance sheet and cleaned up, and you move forward. The other way you can get the debt down is you produce more money and you make it easier to pay the debt, but that's inflationary. So what I call a beautiful deleveraging is when that's done in a balanced way, because one way or another you have to get the debt burdens down, and that means a certain amount of deflationary getting them down by doing a debt restructuring, and a certain amount of inflationary so that they balance, and then you get the debts down, is the best way of doing that.
偷偷告诉大家，我最近发现了新法宝 Royal Face 逆时奇迹系列，它有活肤露、全效精华，还有精华霜。尤其我皮肤比较偏干，所以我非常的注重保湿。保湿做得好，肌肤自然烹润。提亮肤色更年轻，抚平皱纹超有感，而且气色变好。用心保养，每天都更美一点。美吧。